Hey everybody, welcome back to another What Have I Seen Lately. This is day 6, I believe. Yeah, day 6. And this one is very special because this is a very significant piece, not only in the genre of horror, but also in cinema in general. It's also a film that I just been trying to get off my bucket list for so long. That film being, of course, Nosferatu, which was directed by F.W. Monar, who is apparently quite influential within the silent film era. Um, he would uh, he would obviously direct Nosferatu as his most notable film, but he'd also go off to direct The Last Laugh, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is the inspiration for Joker, right? I mean, there's a picture of someone from the silent film era that I remember was an inspiration of sorts for Joker. So I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that was an inspiration. I could be wrong, but I don't know. Excuse me if the lighting is going to go a little bit off today. It's just because I'm filming this in the afternoon. So forgive me, but I'll do my best. So. Um, it is the unofficial adaptation of the Dracula story, of course, the novel written by Bram Stoker, I believe you say his name. Um, Released in 1922, and it tells a story of now in the original version of Nosferatu, they don't refer to Dracula as Dracula because they were taking liberties from the novel. They were inspired by the novel in many ways, but they didn't do page from what the novel did. They ultimately, from my research, basically did what Stanley Kubrick did to The Shining, which is they did their own interpretation of it, but used the book as a reference, as some sort of inspiration of sorts. Um, so instead of it being Count Dracula, it's Count Orlok, who who sets his sights on a small little town and uh, gets a estate agent to come to his castle, um, and uh, and the estate agent makes a journey to get to his castle in Transylvania, and from there there is oddness, there is strange things happening, and then the revelation, of course, of vampires and demonic presence and a plague of sorts that starts to make its way towards the estate agent's hometown and where his wife is also settling. Um, so the thing about Nosferatu that's quite unique is twofold. One, obviously, it being inspired by Dracula and being the first unofficial adaptation of Dracula. It actually led to a lawsuit, I believe, from my research, and because obviously it being inspired in many ways from the novel, um, there was a lot of there was a lot of uh, a lot of conflicting reports of whether or not it was completely you know uh, using of Dracula as a source or not, but eventually they admitted it to being a source, and that led uh, to Stoker, I believe, or someone else suing over the adaptation, um, and apparently a court ruling that ordered all the copies of the film to be destroyed. And since then, there have been a few prints of Nosferatu that had survived over the years, and it's got generated quite a following and quite a recognition over the years. Um, so um, and that's to me is what's really interesting about it. And um, the other interesting thing about it is obviously the significance that it holds in terms of its expression. It's a piece of German expressionism, and there are just the way that it utilizes shadows and the ways that um, the the lighting is played. It's very interesting in that regard. And I think that there's technically a lot of interesting elements at play here. I'm a sucker for black and white, obviously, so obviously the black and white elements really worked for me. Um, but um, but I have to admit, one other thing to note about Nosferatu is that there are many versions of the film out there. So there's like three or two restored versions, and then three other versions that have like extensions or something like that. So it's kind of like a Blade Runner effect where there's like multiple copies, multiple versions of the film out there. Um, and the one I saw was an hour and 20 minutes, an 80-minute version. So I'm not sure if that is the standard version or if there's another version that's more definite and more, you know, uh, better in overall quality. Let me know if any of you guys are Nosferatu nuts. Um, and I also know that there's a remake coming out with Robert Eggers, which I think will be very, very interesting. Um, and I say all this because the original material, if it was what I saw from what I've seen, I think that there are interesting elements to it, but ultimately I found myself just more interested in the research than of the product itself. Um, I mean, because ultimately it is a movie about the consequences to a lack of intuition, ultimately, a lack of foresight, um, and what what happens when someone doesn't think things through or is as observant of their situation. Um, it's pretty. It has that going for it. It has that sort of thread, but um, what it lacks a lot of is its consistency of its details. It feels like a lot of times elements are just thrown at you. There's something about Nina's character that is like kind of there. There's the way that Nosferatu or Count Orlok, right? Orlok, that's his name. Um, Gets to the town and all these other elements. Like it just feels like it just happens. It doesn't feel like it's built up. It just feels like it just happens. Um, the thing that does feel built is its atmosphere, which is fairly ominous. I wouldn't say it's very spooky or very scary. There are some notable visuals, like obviously the part where he goes up the stairs. That's that's interesting enough, and has some creep factor to it. Um, I mean, and technically, just in general, it's fascinating. But ultimately, what deterred me from Nosferatu is a lot to do with its craftsmanship. It just feels more thrown together um, than organically told. As say something like The General, for instance, which I think is just splendid, just absolutely fantastic. Because not only is it simple, it also has a structure that builds within such simplicity. It's not a film that's just here's this and that, an action piece, action piece. Everything has a reason to exist, and the action set pieces also move the story forward. So, with this, it just feels like once we get to the castle, it just feels like the movie is just throwing you information here and there, and then trying to resolve itself at the end. Because the way that Count Orlok dies is also just like it just happens, you know. Just he just walks up to the window and then he's dead, and then the credits. It's like very abrupt, very rushed. Um, and um, and it's just not as involving. Like there's a big portion of the film where we're having to return to the town, and it's just shots of the agent on the horse, and then countering that with Count Orlok on the boat. Um, there's there's a lack of consistent interest. It feels like, but and not as in sync. I feel like at times where the music is placed, it doesn't feel appropriate. Like there's just times where people are just walking around and the music just gets all bombastic. Whereas it should have, I feel like, gone to scenes where Count Orlok is doing his thing, or when there's suspense that's supposed to be building. At times it flows, back to that, but there's other times where it's notably like out of place, Um, so, um, so ultimately, I think that my interest stemmed more from the history of Nosferatu than the actual film itself. Now, as I said, I've only seen one version of the film. Perhaps there's a different version of this film that is a lot better. You guys can let me know that. But as it stands, I think that it has a lot of technical um, intrigue. Like I said, I love the usage of the shadows. I'm a sucker for black and white, so obviously the black and white is going to work well for me. And I like the, you know, the ominous like nature that's being presented, but it just lacks a consistent quality and a consistent flow of structure and a consistent flow of information to further create the frights that it's wishing to present, and ultimately, become something rather intriguing. Because as it stands, it's something that was okay, but I wasn't as involved as was like the general or with what was it, the Gold Rush? I forgot that. It was a Charlie Chaplin film that I really liked, but it's to say that in the parameters of silent film and how it builds interest, it's all about the visuals and all about what's being represented on screen. And for Nosferatu, there's a lot of sitting, there's a lot of walking, and not a lot of momentum, not a lot of action happening. And it is ultimately trying to build in tone, and it's fair in that respect. And like I said, technically also fairly interesting. But in terms of overall story, it just feels like things were just kind of thrown together with the hopes to have some sort of structure. Because again, like there's this Nina element that's thrown in. There's this, there's that, there's this, there's that. Like it feels more like trying to pad it out and trying to give it more of a thickness, when really it just feels more. It feels at times more aimless, in overall quality. So I dare say that it's probably overrated for me. I mean, I don't see where people are loving it. I think it has to do more with the historical factor, the fact that it's, the first real attempt at doing the story, and just probably for the visual achievements that were made from the film. But as it stands, I found myself like just very, half listening to it. It was fine. It was okay in some respects, but in a lot of other respects, I was just really questioning the overall love for it in terms of its narrative, because it's pretty jumbled, pretty just kind of just thrown together. Because the elements don't really add up. What's consistent is its tone and its visual its technical achievements. And again, it might be the version that I saw that might be what's not what's affecting my overall feeling of the film. Perhaps there's a better version out there. You guys let me know. But as it stands, for the 80 minutes that I watched, I feel that it has tonally what it's looking for, but not narratively. And I just found myself not necessarily tapped out, but just not as involved as I believe I should have been. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on Nosferatu. I thought it was fine. Ultimately, I feel it's pretty overrated. But I don't know. You guys let me know your thoughts on Nosferatu if you guys have seen it, and if the other versions of Nosferatu from this film, 1922, are the other versions better? Are the remakes good? I know there's one from 1970s, and then I believe that one had Willem Dafoe in it. I think. I don't know. There's one with Willem Dafoe in it. And of course, your thoughts on the remake that's coming out, which I heard is in color. That's kind of a bummer. I kind of wish it was in black and white, but that's how it is. How it is. But let me know your thoughts about Nosferatu in general in the comment section below. And that's gonna be it for me, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And until then, tomorrow being our last video, I'll catch you guys then and for the next video. So yeah, I'll catch you guys then. Have an awesome day. Bye.